All right, hello everybody, and welcome to this talk about design for accessibility. Oh, there we go. So my name is Quintin Balsdon. I currently work at Spotify. I've been doing Android since 2011. I've been focused on accessibility for the past 4 years, 5 years maybe. And yeah, I've been doing financial apps for most of my career with a little bit of production support. Skills in financial things. So I'd like to start off with just discussing what accessibility is. Accessibility, when we talk about it, we tend to think about people with disabilities, right? And we think that this is the only thing that we need to do, like build a ramp because of a person in a wheelchair. And we need to kind of deconstruct that thinking, in that disability is more about, well, it's more about being able to achieve a task. And are the tools that are available giving someone the ability to achieve their task? Now, there are disabilities that prevent people from doing things, but there are people that also allow better access. So, for example, a ramp is not just for someone in a wheelchair, but could be for someone pushing a pram or someone with sore knees. And so we need to think about disability in the sense of it can be permanent, temporary, or situational. So one of the best examples I like to use is like a bartender in a noisy bar. You know, they're not deaf. They're just, and they're not hard of hearing. They just might not be able to catch something at a specific time. And using that kind of thinking, we need to redefine, like, is the user the problem, or is the task we're trying to facilitate not facilitated correctly, right? Because the sad truth is that people don't really care about a product per se. They don't care about how fancy it is, how even delightful something might be. What people would really care about is getting their task done. When I want to do something, that's what I'm going to pay the company for. So, and users are going to try to go to whichever one is the easiest. Accessibility is a fantastic model and structure that we can use to facilitate that. I'd like to just talk about some examples. Has anyone ever seen a company use a buy now link? Have you? Or is it mostly buttons?
Oh, yeah.
And I want you to think about this, like really think about this. Why? I say, given my experience in this, it's got to do with how obvious it is, right? The button makes the visual space much bigger. This is the power of accessibility, by the way. I have no design chops, like zero. Like I can't choose a great color. I can't design anything nicely. I'm not a designer. I draw stick men like seriously bad, right? So, you know, thinking just when we think about this, like accessibility has given me as a programmer the ability to look at this and break it down. Why don't we use a buy now link? Because of the visual space that is used to click it. It's easy to click on that. It's much less thinking. It's obvious, right? And now when companies don't want you to do something, yeah.
Some people are complaining they can't really hear you.
Oh, should I bring this in closer? How's that, people? Are we better? I feel like I'm gonna start. Please don't let me sing, just by the way, tackle me. So what we're talking about here is great. People, when companies do this, when they use this, we know that they're trying to get us in a certain direction, and you can immediately tell which button they want you to click on, right? Because accept terms and conditions, big green buy now button. Decline cookies. Oh, let's make that the tiniest link possible, right? And that goes to show that companies do understand this, and we have to start thinking about the ethics behind this. Just because we're trying to direct flow in a certain mechanism doesn't make it really right, because there are people, now this is an exaggerated example, this buy now button is huge, but there are people who might be using a magnifier. And when they're looking for a button to click, do they deserve to have to look more because of their disability or because of the technology that they're using? This is another thing. Disability and assistive technology, we want to make sure that we don't talk about just disabled people, but we talk about users in general and include a whole bunch of different demographics in that, because someone who uses a magnifier on their phone or on their screen isn't necessarily disabled, right? And by drawing these lines, we can actually reduce the number of people we're thinking about, just to be clear. So yeah, it's really telling of a company who would do this. And I mean, we can see a lot of it, and a lot of it is kind of like anti-patterns that have become the norm. So for example, in the original list where they said how to validate forms, they would say, oh, you can just disable the button and give a reason why that button is disabled. And so many people went and just did the first thing on the list without doing the second thing. And so you end up with this sort of anti-pattern in the world that people don't really understand, that when a button's disabled, your users don't know what they're trying to do. That's another thing you can think about later. Back here. All right, another example here. I had this with a friend of mine the other day. I was trying to show him how to use a certain app, and they were trying to fill in a credit card thing like this. They were at the point of payment, right? Right at the point of payment. And because it was auto-filled, the placeholder, that's called a placeholder, by the way, not a label. That placeholder was already filled in with an example to the user.
Right.
I don't know. That's what their decision was, right?
Very, very frequently done.
Yeah, it is very frequent. And they just didn't understand that was an example. So they went somewhere else. And it was, I know that's extremely anecdotal, but it is very much an experience that a lot of people do go through. And another problem with this particular thing, I mean, other than the contrast, right? The contrast is terrible for some people, but when you click on these things, immediately you can forget what you were doing. Was it month, year, year? Was it year, month? Where do we, and this is the most critical part of your transaction, right? This is where we need to be putting in the most thinking and the most effort, because if this isn't easy, people are going to drop off. They're going to have second thoughts. And we're never going to know why unless they complain. And sometimes you can degrade a user experience so much that by the time they get to this point, they're just mentally exhausted from trying to remember and figure out, and they just go, it's not worth it, right? So the business implications are quite clear. And this for example, is a better use of placeholders and labels. We've got very clear, distinct labels of where everything should be and how it should be filled in, right? Normally in a form like this, you would also say like what is required or what is optional, right? But obviously with a credit card, you don't need to. So the best solution is to measure twice and cut once, right? This is from this diagram, shows cost over time of fixing issues. It comes from a DQ case study that was done a few years ago. It was specific to the accessibility industry. They were fixing issues in relation to finding out where accessibility kind of costs the most and whatever. And they ended up proving an age-old rule. Well, an age-old anecdote, or I suppose it's a rule. It's a rule in the sense that Moore's law is a rule. It's called the 1-10-100 rule, right? Oh, these slides will be available online. So, and with the links, go to these case studies. So, and the 1-10-100 rule from IBM was proven ages ago, where when you fix something before it gets into development, if you're saving $1, it would cost you $10 when it's already in the system and $100 when it's already out. And you can see like their numbers are fairly honest. It goes from costing 1 times to 3 times to 12 times to 95 times, escalating up. So this was a very interesting case study in that it kind of proved what was already out there. But they also took it another step further, where they looked at how many hours in terms of cost and where most of their accessibility issues were caused actually came from the design phase. It was 67%. And in development, it took 3 hours to fix. Testing between 15.5 and 9.5 hours. And after it released into production, 37.5 hours. So again, this is from the same case study. So it's one example, but it follows reasoning and it follows logic that if we can fix our issues before they even come in, or fix accessibility and that kind of thing before they come in, we've got something going, right? We're doing it right. Yes.
I'll do the pizza stuff now.
Sure. We're going to break to order for pizza.
Okay. Let's just see. We've got 3, 4, 5, 6,
Sing button.
10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17 people to feed. I know what you like. So is there anybody that needs gluten-free? Anyone who needs vegan or vegetarian? So I'll just get 1 plant-based and 2 or 3 of the others. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for waiting, everyone online. I don't know how many people are online, so I don't even know how many people I'm speaking to.
People online.
Hello, and hello, Mom, by the way. So with that, right, refinement is our opportunity to really shine here, right? Especially when we're thinking about serving minorities, right? If we look at it kind of like cost per user, if we want to consider the fact that disabled users might fall into the minority, we'll be maximizing the amount of work we put in per user by addressing these issues much earlier. This is my favorite diagram. Like this is just simple, and it demonstrates the decreasing design alternatives that we have as time goes on and the increasing cost of changes, which is, yeah. So the earlier we get things in, and the earlier we discuss issues and know what those issues are, the better off we'll be. Yes.
It reminds demand and supply break-even diagram.
Great. So we'll get the demand supply diagram there as well. Right. So when we think about making decisions and how we go about this, right? We have kind of 3 options. We can go with what users say, come with an idea, and create a product. This is anecdotally attributed to Henry Ford, where he said, if I'd asked users what they want, they would have told me they want a faster horse, right? We need to think about, yes, what you're saying, but what do you actually need? What's the requirement? Is it horse, or is it getting from A to B faster? We could look at, see what users do with existing products, right? And then come up with our ideas based on that. Or we can have a hunch and try to create an idea, generate a product, and put it out there to users. I'm not saying which one is better here, but I think if you want to maximize your profit and you want to maximize how things go out and how you were initially perceived, you would need to understand that these 3 models are being put into place. Right, so where does accessibility fit in, right? Like looking at, should be a familiar diagram for most of you, maybe not with the accessibility bubbles, but it's a sort of standard software development lifecycle. And what I've tried to do here is identify the silos into which we operate our teams, right? So in the first silo, we've got designers, and then developers, and then testers, and then delivery staff, right? Each of these incurs a cost as we go through the cycle. And the more we add people in, the more cost it is, and the more we're trying to fix things, the more that cost increases. And so we've got, I think you spend about 80% of your life cycle in maintenance. So it's not even in the creation of something, but in the maintenance of it. And accessibility should really be considered at all of these points. I was talking to someone earlier, and it's, everyone can recognize that accessibility covers quite a wide berth of things, right? So, it's very difficult to talk about accessibility in a non-tangible way, because we're actually dealing with tangible users with tangible issues who are trying to use a product. So, and we're always trying to bring this back to user experience. How do we make it better? How do we make it smoother, more efficient, better for them? Right? If it's not user-centric, there's no point to accessibility, just by the way. So yeah, in the first stage, Zoom keeps on taking my focus away. That's one rule we're going to discuss. So we've got user research who should be conducting studies with disabled users and people with accessibility needs. We, as developers and whatever, we might not have too much input there. Then we've got how elements come into the product backlog, convincing product managers and program managers to bring this in. I think this is the hardest sell. These are the people who are kind of obsessed with the MVP, right? And maybe don't understand that people aren't minimal or viable. Everyone deserves access, right? And they might be more difficult to convince. And then we have where developers come in. So my kind of area of work is when you're refining something. You're taking work on and you're bringing it into your backlog. You're starting to think about how you're going to implement things. And this is where Giovanni next time is going to be talking about where you can maximize your potential as well, because you want to be thinking about what tests do I write to achieve these business objectives, right? Tests and accessibility and all of that all informs product quality at the end of the day, right? And this is where I think if you're a new developer, someone coming into the field or looking for a job, refinement is where you can really shine. I used to, when I was at the bank, I would always hate going to refinement sessions and, sitting there thinking about stuff I wouldn't know how to input properly or what valuable input I could give. Considering accessibility here is how you do that. It is really a great way to go in and start asking questions. And then in the last place, it's in your development cycle. Now, you'll notice that this isn't just on the tester branch, that testing and developers both test for accessibility. And this is really important. It's really important that everybody's involved, because the more minds you have on the right issues, the better you're going to be at resolving them. And the more information spreads. My counterpart and I, I'm an Android person, he's an iPhone person. We would sit and triage both the iPhone and Android issues together. And by doing that, we learn so much about the other platform and how they really work. Right. So I think that's where we design for best. Okay, so these are the 7 universal design principles. I'll quickly run through them. They are really, really useful in terms of how we think about products and services. And some of them might feel that they're a bit for the built environment, like for buildings and that kind of thing. But when you apply them to applications, it can be really powerful as well. And you'll also see my absolute love for sketch planations in the next 2 slides, by the way. So these 7 principles, equitable use is that no matter how you work or interact with your system, everyone can make use of it. Flexibility means that you accommodate a wide range of preferences and abilities. Simple and intuitive use. This comes down to people being familiar with your product in the sense that they're familiar with other things. A simple example of this is links. We always think of links as being underlined and maybe a different color. If we do that on mobile, we should do the same thing, because our users aren't going to know the difference if you've bolded them or something, and the users don't care. When they see digital content, they see it in a very specific way. And then there's perceptible information, so that regardless of how what environment they might find themselves in. So if they're trying to be quiet in a lecture hall and watch a video, if you're like watching YouTube right now, you probably have the captions, right? And that's you using assistive tech for your benefit.
Tom Gill asked, what is the source of universal design principles?
If you do a Google search for universal design principles, it is online. I don't think there was one source that I took this from. I do apologize for not giving a source.
Compilation.
Yeah. This is certainly not my ideas, that's for sure. But these are like really great general principles you can take into any refinement. That's really the idea. And then fault tolerance is that we minimize any potential hazards. So you can't submit information incorrectly, or there's a way that if you do submit that information incorrectly that you can undo, right? Think how easy it is to undo buying plane tickets that you accidentally booked the wrong dates for. No shots fired, right? And then low physical effort means that there's something that you can do some things with minimal fatigue, right? This is one of the ones that really sounds like it's for built environment, and I'm going to show you something that really blew my mind when I read it. I hope it's as if sort of effectual for you, but we'll see. And then size and space for approach. This really is built environment, and you can think of this like an ATM or a hole in the wall, making sure that someone in a wheelchair can actually get up to it and into it and have the privacy that everybody else has, right? Sometimes in the built environment, this might be having two, right? You'll see a lot of disabled bathrooms. They're probably located on the ground floor just to make it easier, right? And they'll be a lot bigger and that kind of thing. So yeah, we're using these 7 principles. These are some of the things you could walk into a refinement session with. And how do some of these translate? I'm not going to go into all of them and how they all translate. So one of the things is that we can talk about to designers with is something called an affordance, right? An affordance is, what do we think of doing with something when we come to it? What's our intuition going to be when we see something? So great example in the built environment is we see these handles on the doors that tells us to pull, right? And sometimes it can be push as well, but most of the time when we see a handle, we're going to try to pull it.
A great example, just in the way through from here to the...
Yeah, so the bathrooms here are an example of this, right? Like, and we can talk to a designer in these terms. They'll get what we mean when we say, hey, I think the affordance is in the wrong direction. Or when I look at it, it seems like this. Am I right? Am I wrong? We also need to remember that we could be missing something. And that's why we don't need to be, we can remain humble when we know these things, right? And yeah.
Have you covered the fat finger syndrome?
Oh, fat finger. We're going to get to very, very specific things later. Yeah. So, and this actually does also come into it, right? Is Fitts' law. So Fitts' law is the one that I love the most. And in a mobile context, it could seem a bit weird. Like, hey, what about the distance to things? And it talks about how the effort that we're putting in can be calculated based on the distance that we have to travel. And depending on the size of the object and the distance that we're traveling to, that increases the effort. It's actually number of clicks or number of taps isn't really a measure of how good or bad an experience is. That can kind of be gamed a little bit, but if you've got, for example, a list of, I don't know, songs, and each of these songs has a number of controls, right? So you can play, download, or learn more about the artist. If we convert that sort of that portrait picture into a landscape picture, and the distance between the name of the song and all those controls increases, people lose track of where they are on a line, right? And so the effort becomes greater. And so maybe we need to rethink when we go into that screen, how we present it to the user to make it easier. And that's just guiding eyes. So to simplify things, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines came up with 4 principles that they consider. These are based on the Universal Design Principles, by the way. So the 4 main categories are that content is perceivable, that we can, with our senses and with more than one sense, we can interpret what things are doing or what things are. That they're operable, that they are usable to many people. Yes.
You're missing one,
Which is?
remembering.
That would be understandable, right? So that we don't overload someone with information. I don't know about you, but when somebody sends me a wall of text in a WhatsApp message or something, I just turn off. I actually can't respond immediately. It's just too much. And if I'm trying to go through a process of buying a product or something where I actually have to engage my brain and then there's this wall, I kind of stop. And that's why they've started putting terms and conditions and privacy policies as links to other pages. Because if you do want to go through that, you're absolutely welcome to, but they're not going to overwhelm you as you go in. And then the last one is robust. This one's a little bit more tricky to nail down, but it's got to do with the fact that we use standard elements to define things, right? And I'm going to talk about all of these in details, right? What I've done is I've taken the 70 web content accessibility criteria and I've filtered it down into something I feel that would be useful if you're going into a refinement session. And there is a summary slide at the end, so please don't feel overwhelmed. And I'm going to talk about the different elements that we can be thinking of when we go into refinement, right? And this is how we can influence design, have impact on design, and ultimately benefit the user and the business with the software that we create. And also, another important factor is talking about prioritization. Now, please remember, when I talk about prioritization, these are my recommendations, right? Prioritization is very tricky. When I think, because I can't give you a blanket rule. If this was easy, we wouldn't need professionals, right? And so what we want to make sure that we do is we consider how things impact the user experience. Something to me is a high priority when it blocks anyone, right? Doesn't matter if it's one user or a million users. If it blocks someone based on their abilities or their tools that they're using, it is a blocker to me, and I consider that high, right? Medium, I will always struggle defining things as a medium because I think my brain wants to be either high or low, but it's medium tends to be when it becomes more difficult to use, but an alternative exists. So for example, I struggle saying that font scaling is a medium issue, but magnification tools do exist on all the operating systems. And so it is something that is available to users. And so that kind of thing. And then low would be additional features that are targeted at making the experience more pleasurable, targeted at specific user groups, and ultimately just make it better. There's not many low ones on this because we wouldn't. That's not what we concern ourselves. I think prioritization is a real skill. It is what this allows us to do is it allows us to talk to a company and talk to our peers in a way that allows them to understand where the concerns are and why we have those concerns.
Mute the wrong place.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go through these WCAG criteria, not all 70 of them, right? You say 70 criteria, people fall asleep. And I get it. That is my job, right? My job is to simplify this for you, is to bring it down. And we're really focused on how do we design in an accessible way? How do we bring that design into development? Not having silos, but communicating with people. Also, another impact that you can have, we'll talk about this later. Well, let's talk about it now. You don't need, as a developer, you don't need to ask to do your job properly, right? And doing your job properly and ethically would be to test it with different accessibility settings and technologies, right? When you go to a project manager and you say, hey, can I do this thing? They think it's extra work. That's immediately the thing that you're communicating. And when you do that, they're immediately going to say, no, don't spend extra time. But as you develop these muscles, as you do these things more and more, you get better at them and the time goes down. And this happens with testing as well, by the way. One of the biggest misconceptions with testing is that you have to write every test at the beginning. No, that's not how testing works. You write one at a time, right? Giovanni's going to cover that. That's not what I'm going to do. But what you can do with accessibility, and each one of these, is decide to pick on one and gradually grow. Remember, you don't have to make everything accessible right from the get-go. Everybody can learn and grow and make mistakes and understand, as long as you're willing to do that. Stay humble and definitely don't ever say, well, if I was blind, I would want this. No, no, no. Do things properly and simply, right? So for example, everything should have text. Every element on a digital screen should have some kind of text representation. So videos should have captions, subtitles. Image buttons should have some kind of description as to what they are and potentially what they're going to do as well. We don't have to do this for decorative images. So for example, if you've got a little credit card image with pay on it, that is a decorative image, right? So we don't have to describe that. But if it's just a credit card, then we need to say this is the pay button, right? We need to give that kind of alternative text. I think it's ARIA described by or content description in Android. Covered web, Android, and I think iPhone a little bit. So yeah. So and then some of these things cost almost no time or just a question. Hey, that button's just an image button. What's its description? That's how you bring it up in a refinement, right? Because maybe it needs to be translated for different users. Or, you know, hey, I see this button, it's just an image. What does that actually do? If you need to ask that in a refinement question, can you imagine what your users are saying, right? Like, just, you know, ask those questions. It seems obvious to say, hey, what does that do? Or is that an actual button? Or is that just some other control, right? Understand those things and provide those text elements. And then color. Right? So don't use color to indicate state alone. So for example, a checkbox, you'll notice that it's gray in the middle with and when it's not selected. And then when it's selected, it's not only green, but it's got a check in it, right? Or there's some other kind of indication. One thing we do in Spotify is we have the shuffle button. That's gray when it's unselected. And when you select it, it's got a little dot underneath it as well, and it's green. So these things tell the user that something is happening, right? I think it's 1 in 12 men have red-green color blindness, and it affects women 1 in 200. This was a great diagram that I found searching the web for like color blindness reference charts. Seeing how this is an amazing tool is to like understand how other people might see your app and might understand visually what's going on. I don't think you get a lot of like black and white color blindness where it's just shades of gray, but it does happen. And understanding that those users have a right to access your systems and use them, right, is very important. The next one is keyboard accessibility, right? This is probably the most difficult to convince mobile developers to do, but being able to access things with a keyboard, I think keyboards are the most dynamic input mechanism we've ever created. I think they are just an amazing thing, and they come in so many different formats. We've got game controllers, mice, we've got switches, foot pedals, you know, steering wheels, all sorts of different input devices just translate to some kind of keyboard at the end of the day. And by supporting this, you can really be making a massive difference to somebody's life. And this is how we support some people who have dexterity issues, right? So if someone is shaking, they might use a keyboard rather than using gestures or a mouse. Also, another example of a controller is a TV remote, right? If somebody's trying to use your stuff on a TV, that would be a TV remote is just another keyboard, right? And then font size. So font scaling, some people, I think 20% on average, people scale their fonts. And one of the things that developers sort of don't know is that it's why. Or sorry, what was the question?
I often find text gets lost because I
Yeah.
change it, and where do I hit OK? Off on my screen.
Yeah. And where do I hit pay, right? Where do I click this pay button? And the thing is, like, it erodes trust, right? Anything small like that, it feels like maybe making a petty argument or whatever, but these things, that slow erosion, that slow disrespect really makes a big difference at the end of the day and will scale. And so the recommendation with font is that you can scale up to 200% without the loss of content or functionality. Users can probably scale further. I met someone who scaled up to 1,000, right? They don't expect it to be super gorgeous. They just expect it to work, right? And one of the biggest things you can do with supporting this, use standard sizes, but also don't restrict the size of the container, right? That's the mistake a lot of developers make, is the container gets a fixed size. And so when the font scales, it gets, it overlaps, and then you've got a problem. Right. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed that's really useful is when a lot of your content is, or those containers that do contain text are scrollable, even if it doesn't look like it needs to be, because when that font scales, all of a sudden they can just scroll through it, which is a great usability thing. And then orientation, one thing that a lot of devs forget is to just test in landscape mode. Just flip it over, make sure it works. It can save you a lot of time and effort knowing what the design should look like, asking those questions. One of the things about supporting orientation after the fact is, again, that kind of issue is one that scales really badly. When you now need to do it, you come back and you have to fix everything, as opposed to doing one thing at a time, getting it right, and moving on. And this again is with testing. Yeah.
You should also have negative and positive check. So does it work as positive, black on white, or does
yeah.
black?
So yeah, we'll get to colors. That's with colors, right? Does it work on dark mode and light mode, right? Or can we invert the colors and it works?
In design symbol, you always do both.
Yes, yeah. So you should do both. Yeah. Sorry, I am repeating what you say just so that the people are and then headings, right? Headings are something that I think visual users tend to take for granted. We can sometimes lose sight of the fact that for screen reader users, these are navigational anchors, right? One of the most useful things about web headings is that a lot of the time you can just click on them and you get a little hash and then the heading in your URL, and you can share an article right at the relevant piece. And if headings have been defined on the screen, you can do that regardless of whether the heading is clickable, by the way, which is really useful. That's a use that I find with headings, but a lot of screen reader users use it to get to the right kind of content, right? And they're navigational hooks. They're like, you can skip. You can say, I want to go to this heading, back heading, this heading. And it's a really, really useful mechanism. It is like one of the easiest things to do because it's just semantic sugar, H1, right? Semantic HTML, or accessibility heading. I don't know, is that the iPhone one? I don't know. Something like that. And then the Android one is heading, right? And so it's not just big and bold text, but it's actually some kind of semantic sugar, which can make a world of difference to users, right? I have labeled it as a medium because hopefully your screens are fairly short in, you don't have a lot of content anyway, but this is something that can turn into a high very quickly. And then pause, stop, hide. This is now anything that plays, anything audio, visual, anything like that should be able to be paused, stopped, and hidden, right? Users should have the right to choose this for themselves. And There are settings in the operating system. Not a lot of users even know that these settings exist, which is why apps would sometimes surface these controls to users as well. Again, just shows respect for the user. We care about your concerns if you do you in this space, right? Then we've got enough time, which I don't know if I have, but
About 45 minutes.
great. So enough time is talking about making sure users can achieve what they need to in the time that is given. So some users might require a little bit extra time just for a cognitive reason or whatever. This is where Android has one of the most beautiful settings that I've ever seen. There is a setting for this in Android. I've never seen it anywhere else. The problem with the setting is it's so hidden that even in the documentation for the user, it says that, hey, developers don't know about this either. Like, it's so sad that Google's had to put that in, but it is in your accessibility. If you look for time to take action, it's there in Android, and you can say, I need an extra 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 minutes. I think those are the options, right? And it's just added on to the system thing. So when a little toast or snack bar pops up, you've got extra time before it just disappears on you. And this is something that, for example, in a bank they could really make use of is, first of all, surfacing it to users in their settings and then saying, okay, we've noticed you need this. So when we have a sort of cancelable transaction that runs on a timer, we can say, okay, you've pushed the button. We're actually going to only activate it in that amount of time to give you time to react. Uber does this quite well, I think. Uber Eats has done it when you order. I don't order a lot from Uber Eats, but like they have that countdown timer to say, hey, are you sure? Is your order all correct? And it counts down and you have to actively tap it to engage, which is great. What a wonderful little add-on. And there you go, an extra tap, making it actually better for the user, not worse. Then fat fingers, touch target sizes, right? So this is, again, something we can kind of visually look at, but also in development, we can go and make sure that our elements are big enough to click on, big enough to interact with. This benefits not only like most people, but people who use a head pointer or people with larger fingers, people who aren't so confident. This just makes it better for everybody, right? This is one of those things that we can quite clearly lose sight of in a way. It's very easy to correct. But also keep in mind that the visual touch target size is important. This is why I generally say we really shouldn't be doing links on mobile at all, because their touch target size is awful. But we can make that better. So for example, we could have a little icon next to the link indicating that it's a link. So now we've got some kind of visual thing and we make that big enough. So there are ways of improving that. Then actions. This I say is sort of medium to low. Actions are a very specific tool that assistive tech users use. I actually wanted to do some videos on examples of this, but I don't want to be too predisposed towards Android, but that's where my examples would be. All Android and iPhone both have the concept of actions, which are hidden secondary actions that a user can do visually, but these would actually kind of encumber users to use. So for example, let's go back to the song, where we've got a song, it's got a play button, but then we've got other buttons that are secondary to that. So it's save to library, download, more, right? More options. So the way screen reader users, actually, let's go to keyboard users, right? So let's say you're a keyboard user and you're tabbing through, you want to go from item to item. You don't want to go like play, download, see more, whatever. You don't want to push 5 times just to go through one item. This is where that scale starts working against you. Number of clicks do start working against you, or number of interactions to get over an element. What you can do is you can say, I'm going to identify the primary action. That's going to stay as what it is, as just a click. And then the secondary actions are going to be accessibility actions. And these are going to disappear for assistive tech users into a hidden menu that they can access. They know it's there, and a visual user wouldn't notice any difference. but a screen reader or keyboard user would just go from element to element, knowing that there's this menu available to them that they can get through. Very, very nice tool. Another one you could potentially use if you're a bit scared of doing this is headings, like go through headings. I wouldn't recommend swapping the two out, but it is possible to do. Right, and then we get into understandable, which is when we do error identifications, we make sure that colors and icons appear. So if you've got red text, there's a little red error as well, so people can identify that, right? I really love live regions. Rob taught me about live regions on his blog today, by the way. I'd done Android for like 8 years or 9 years by the time I learned about this. It is something that just tells a user that it updates frequently. And this is an aspect of development that I really want to point out. When doing the actual work of accessibility, or the work of doing it properly, when you implement things correctly, you end up not having to go back. I know that sounds so obvious, but I want to take you on a little imaginary journey, right? If we had to force a screen reader to speak about something all the time. So let's say we've got a blind user who can't see anything, and we constantly have to announce to them that there are errors on the screen, right? Now, we solve this problem, we've done all that work, and then the next thing, a magnifying user comes and has exactly the same complaints. They say exactly the same things. And we're like, well, why did we do all that work if it's not going to work for this user? And this is where doing it right and doing the minimal thing right works out. Because with the live region, all it's saying is, hey, this thing, and I love iPhone's word terms here, is updates frequently. We're telling the operating system this thing updates frequently. And so a magnifying user might be notified somehow. They might either be dragged there, which I'm not a huge fan of, but that's the operating decision, not mine. Or they might get a little bubble in their magnifying window to say, hey, something's updated on the screen, go check it out. And I don't think that exists yet, but it could. And we've already done the work by adding the syntactic sugar of saying that this thing updates. And again, why would I recommend actions? I think actions are phenomenal things because we could connect that to the keyboard and then have secret keyboard actions for people, right? So when we do this stuff, it all comes under the sort of umbrella of robust, but we're doing it in a way that we do minimal work, get it right, and can move on with our jobs, right? Then labels and instructions. I think these are we saw this with the credit card example. Don't hide your labels and instructions in as placeholders. That's just, going to chase them away. Right, and then the last one. Oh, finally there. This one is the most important, right? But it's the last in the list. I have to go POUR, right? This is robust. So this one can feel like the most complicated, but if you do this, you're probably like, I won't give you a percent because then I'm stuck with it because this is recording. But you're doing a lot of work when you do role name value, right? So the role is just what this thing is, standard control. How does it boil down to a standard control? And even if this is something you need to consider if you're building custom components, especially when you're building custom components, you have to fulfill this, otherwise it's not going to be accessible. For example, if we're creating a button that we don't want a border on for some odd reason, why not just use a label with a click listener, right? Why not? It feels right, it works the same. Well, technology needs to know that this is a button. It doesn't know whether it's a checkbox or a radio button or whatever, because now you've implemented it using the wrong kind of inheritance structure, right? So role is incredibly important. Boil it down to a basic component. Is this a button? Is it a checkbox? Is it a radio element? Is it a slider? All these things can be really, really helpful for users, especially if they can't see what's going on. Then we've got a name, some unique name for it. This is the submit button. This is the cancel button, etc. Right? And the value. What is the local state of this thing? Is it checked, not checked? Is it at 46%? Are we activated, not activated, switched on, switched off? However you want to describe it, make sure the user is clear on that. All of these things sound kind of obvious, but giving them that syntactic nature can be quite a lot of research and takes a bit of a while to get used to. Yeah.
Go back to your list of songs.
Yes.
Each of them has a play button. How do you ensure that each of those buttons has a unique ID?
Play this song. Play Flowers by Miley Cyrus. Play, I don't know. That's the only song I can think of on the top spot. I don't listen to Miley Cyrus. But yeah, you could, you could give it play and then that particular name, download that particular name. So that's how you can do a unique name. Right, and then putting it all together. So I think it sounds like a lot what I just told you, right? That was all the detail. This is, once you're a little bit familiar with these concepts, this is it, right? This is the checklist, if you will, right? This is something you can walk in and be like, okay, how do I make something accessible? This is a fantastic start, right? It's not everything, and it's certainly not testing with disabled users, right? With real users. It is where you can start, right? So, yeah, this is something that a lot of people will do, is create some kind of little checklist or whatever. This is mine from my experience with development. This is what people can take into their design and implementations, do on their own, and make sure you don't need to put any massive amount of work in once you get used to this, right? And it's just something every time you can go and tick these off and say, okay, I've at least done something towards the quality of this thing. Then the next thing is communication skills. This is something that has impacted me quite a lot. Because my role is accessibility, I am constantly challenged with not being the accessibility police, right? My job is not to hunt people down, throw them in accessibility jail, and try them later, right? It is a real challenge because I kind of feel like a QA, even though I'm a developer. And nothing is a personal attack, right? A lot of people are just ignorant, right? That's why I do the talks, to meet people, to learn, to grow. And sometimes questions can come out that just sound completely biased, because ultimately the only good reason for accessibility is the moral reason. I've tried to find like return on investment reasons for everything else, anything else. And the best argument for accessibility is purely that it is good for everyone, which is why I'm doing this talk at the BCS, right? Is because that's what we do, right? We do ethical software development, and that's really where accessibility shines. That's how we do it. That's how we make sure that our software is ethical, right? And you wouldn't have thought that a border around a button is ethical before you walked in here, probably. But there you go. There is an impact that we can have on society, and it's got to do with including people, right? And I think that's a big principle. The RNID, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf, they just published some research about how deaf people feel in conversations. Because one of the things that I've noticed is, even though 1 in 5 people in the UK are deaf or hard of hearing, we probably I don't know how many people in this room associate with deaf people in a personal capacity. I know I don't. And it's because they feel so isolated that they've kind of isolated themselves out. And it's when people are talking around them, they kind of go, oh, it doesn't matter, right? And when people say that to the deaf person or hard of hearing person, they feel like what we're saying to them is, you don't matter, right? Including people is the most valuable thing you can do with your time, right? Yes, the goal of the business is to make money. Yes, we want to do that effectively. That's why we need to start here, right? Starting here is important. And it's not everything's going to be perfect, but assuming good intent from people who don't understand, is so critical. The relationships that you build. I've had really difficult conversations with people where we haven't managed to achieve what I would have thought was the best outcome. We achieved something else in a different area, and they came to me and they were like, wow, I'm so happy that we made something that's more accessible than it was last year. They didn't contribute anything to that, but they were still proud of that achievement. And the thing is, by having that relationship, it means next time when I go to them, I can get more out of them, right? I can say, hey, you know, rather than beating down on them and being like, hey, you did nothing last time, let's get, you know, instead I can go and win people with honey. And it's so important to assume that good intent from people, to assume that they want to be better, even if they don't want to be better. And by helping them understand, we do this by creating safe spaces when we converse with people. So a safe space is trying to understand that person's perspective. And the second part is trying to bring things into a shared pool of meaning. So I respect your opinion, and I want you and I to contribute to this pool of meaning. This really excellent book called Crucial Conversations, it's got like a fire diagram. It talks about when stakes are high, emotions are strong, and opinions are conflicting. And that is what makes a crucial conversation, is kind of these three elements: high stakes, strong emotions, conflicting opinions. And when we can evaluate what's more important in the conversation, we can really communicate really effectively. And the two things you need to decide on is, do I want the relationship to work, or do I want to get my point across? They're both valid goals. It's not about winning. It's just about, what do I need the most? And sometimes we need to play the long game in the relationship. There's also 3 kinds of money we can spend. I do not recommend that you ever use legalities or whatever. It is the law to be accessible, by the way, but that's trying to beat people with the stick, right? But there are 3 kinds of money we spend when spending money on accessibility, and you will spend money on accessibility. Everyone does. Every company does. Apple did this many years ago. Microsoft does it all the time. Everybody's spending money on accessibility. If you want to stay in the game for the long haul, you spend money on accessibility. There are 3 kinds of money, right? This is completely stolen from Cole Groves. I added the smart money. There's the smart money, which is doing it like this, bringing it in, not asking permission, but just doing it, right? Getting started and hit the ground, right? Then there's the good money. Make it worthwhile, right? Bring that shared meaning. And then there's the bad money, which is dealing with regressions, going through things over and over, complaints, lawsuits. You know, as soon as customer service needs to be engaged, you've got something happening at the worst possible time in your cycle, right? Because if there's a complaint on customer service, it needs to go all the way back to design, go through the filters and go through development. The whole cycle happens again, right? Something that could have been avoided. I mean, going through this for buttons that don't have labels is the most painful and arduous exercise, because now it's something as silly as a button has no label, but now the designer needs to think of it. A content writer needs to do it. Then you need the tester to implement it, or a programmer to implement it. Tester could do it. Tester to test it, release it, you know, and already you might have a bad reputation, right? I mean, just creating a JIRA ticket is, you know, a mental exercise for me that I hate, right? Whereas it could have been just something on an acceptance criteria on the original ticket when it was created. And then we spend less time on this stuff. We spend less time on the admin work and more time on doing cool things, right? Another thing about communication is that accessibility is about human beings. It's not about the numbers, right? One of the biggest misconceptions I think that people can have with accessibility is that it's some kind of charity exercise, that we're doing something for the benefit of others, or benefit for benefits or something, right? Like we are doing it for the benefit of others. Sorry, that was a slip. But like, it's actually a discipline. One of the things that kind of gets me down on social media is people say, oh, accessibility is never done. You know, it's never complete and whatever. And man, that makes me tired just thinking about that. But it's like security or performance or safety. Those things are never done either, right? They're never complete. It's like washing. You know, you're always going to have washing. So it's something that's a continuous effort that we drive towards. We strive towards it, but compliance is not necessarily the goal. Compliance is just a word we throw around, but like what we actually want is to achieve something for people and giving access to people. And while disabled people are impacted the most and they need to be considered as such, there are a lot of features that just help everybody, right? Scaling font could really make the difference if somebody is in a bind trying to report a ticket number to customer service and they're in a heated call or whatever. Just being able to scale or zoom can mean the world to someone. Sure, it might not be the most delightful thing, but it can be a very functional thing for somebody. And it can make all the difference. I mean, my sort of panic thought is if somebody was frustrated with something I did and they just shouted at it in the public square, you know, like everybody else hearing that, that's called the network effect, right? We want to make sure that, like, I'd rather have someone shouting in absolute joy, this is amazing, rather than this is so frustrating. And that happens a lot in the industry as well. So, and just because you need a feature doesn't make you disabled. You could be left-handed. You could have smaller hands. You might have turned off color for whatever reason to just be a better phone user. You know, a lot of people turn off their colors to make phones less distracting. There's a lot of good reason why you would need accessibility features without being disabled. And exact numbers are impossible to maintain. I really want to put this in the beginning, but it's hard because this is this section. Like when people, one of the things about numbers, right? Like you'll notice I haven't told you how many disabled people there are in the world, right? I've told you a few numbers with color blindness and maybe a few other numbers here and there. But the reason why I don't use these numbers as my selling point is because it's very difficult to maintain that. I told you with font scaling as well, 20%. But a lot of these numbers are very difficult to get. They're very difficult to maintain as well. And it's got to do with the whole transient nature of disability, because you could be temporary disabled, situationally disabled. And so it's kind of like if you showed me a rainbow and you said to me, circle the red bit and tell me that number. I can't do it, right? Or what's the minimum temperature for hot? You know, I can't give you that number. And so that's why I wouldn't sell accessibility from the basis of numbers. I sell it from the basis of morality. And that's what most user experience professionals do. That book that I showed you with that diagram, with the decreasing options and increasing cost, they say usability is nothing without accessibility, right? That is like the textbook on cost justifying usability, right? So yeah, and then like I've said before, you don't need permission to do a good job, right? When we ask an engineer to build a bridge, we expect that bridge to be safe, right? We expect engineers to go in with a certain amount of care and the duty of care to do things properly. And again, that's why I'm here at the BCS during this talk, is I believe software engineering is engineering, and there's a duty of care that goes into that. And this is that, right? And yeah, so put it into your practice, do one thing at a time. I know it can seem like a lot. Those slides that I went through seem like just when I first found out about that, I didn't have these slides. These are the slides I would want, and I can sort of tell that it's a bit overwhelming. That's why I summarized it into one slide at the end. Like when I started this, I had 70 criteria that were very bland, very kind of clinical to read, and it was a wall of text. The hilarious thing about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is they're cognitively overwhelming, which is an accessibility issue, right? And so splitting this all up can be very difficult, which is why I would say, you know, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time, right? Just take it slow, take it one step at a time. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You're not going to get it perfectly correct. You're going to do one thing thinking you're doing it right, and then another user group gets left out, and you have to apologize and move on, right? And well, not move on, but apologize and correct it. But you know, these are things that we learn as we go. It's not a matter of being you know, perfect all the time. There's one of the most difficult ones for me is color. Color is so hard for me to choose and distinguish, and I can see color fine. I just, like I said in the beginning, I have zero design chops. I can't choose a nice color, right? All the colors in this were generated from templates or stolen from wherever, right? So, yeah.
Go back a slide.
Sure, it's mine.
Go back a slide, please.
That one or that one? Probably the functional one. Yeah.
The anticipation for getting an explanation for the quad. You see the black quad at the bottom.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So
What's that mean?
yeah. So by this is I did mention this, but when we sell accessibility by numbers, we create a precedent, right? So if I say to you there are 1 in 6 people are disabled in the world, right? And I sell this to a business as this is why you need an accessibility program. They go, wow, that's a lot of people, right? Like we need to support accessibility as a whole. And then they start asking questions like, well, how many people need that specific feature? And by selling that now, because I can't answer that, because I can't give you that number, I end up looking like I've sold you snake oil, right? And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that when we sell accessibility, we sell it for the right reasons. It is important that there are people out there with real needs, but it is more important that we cater to everyone equally, regardless of their demographic, right?
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, so that's the story. So we can really resolve a lot of issues before they become issues if we just consider them. This is SDLC 101, Software Development Lifecycle 101, is we can save the business money by doing it earlier. So if we are going to be considering numbers, if we are going to think cost per user or cost per fix per user, by doing it earlier, we're already saving the money. We're not going to be saving the money later. And just because it's a problem that we haven't dealt with before doesn't mean we can leave it on the floor. It means we need to bring it in, fix it now, because it's only going to escalate further, right? We want to spend less time dedicated doing the wrong thing or doing the thing wrong. And we want to spend as little time as possible firefighting. And this is, again, when I was writing these things, I'm like, I feel like I'm defending test-driven development here, because you know, when we do it like this, we just end up with much more reliable software where changes are known and well-defined, or things are well-defined and changes are done with thought and intention, right? We want to make sure that we're stepping intentionally and not unintentionally. That is my whole TDD talk. So yeah, and then we want to also know what potential issues are in advance. Like, I know that the issues I went through were quite numerous today. There are 70 of them. Some of them are considered much like lower on the scale of importance because they would be for like medical equipment and that kind of thing. That's only about 20 or 10 of them. So let's say 50 criteria. But the fact is we have these criteria, these well-defined criteria that we can go and look through. And then once you've read through it once, it's actually pretty easy going through it again. And that's amazing. Well, you can measure incredible things using these accessibility criteria, right? If you look for web content accessibility criteria online, just make sure you don't click on the sponsored links, but click on the actual W3C link. There are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. So the sponsored links are snake oil. Putting that out there now. But what we can do with this is use it to our benefit to create great products from the start, reduce those regressions, and ultimately reduce silos in our organization, right? You want to communicate with designers. You want to communicate with testers. The biggest problems you're going to have are when you're not talking to these people, right? And being able to talk to people on their level with their terms, being able to use words like Fitts law, like it's useful to them because they'll be like, oh yes, yeah, you're right. Like that makes sense there. Or an affordance. Oh, cool. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Having these hooks, it's the same as talking about design patterns, right? In software engineering. You don't necessarily need to know what all the design patterns are, but if you've got them in your head, you can at least communicate effectively with other devs. Yeah, and so that is the talk. I think I've made it.
Yeah, we've got 10, 15 minutes before the pizzas.
Okay, great. So are there any questions I can help? If there's anything.
By the way, you mentioned the W3C guidelines, and I seem to recall that for web pages at least, they used to have a tool to actually give you a metric.
Yeah.
Is that same sort of thing available for mobile applications?
There are tools for mobile. There's the accessibility scanner from Google. It doesn't do as much as those web tools will do because it doesn't have access to as much source code, but it does do that. There are iPhone tools as well. Danny and Rob can point you to those. I will add links to this for those scanners. Do we have any questions from the audience? I don't have, yeah.
Yes, so you're a Mac user also. Don't you find Mac is very inaccessible compared to, I'm going to compare to Linux and Windows when I could do everything with a keyboard, for example, or where you can choose a non-glare screen.
Sorry.
You can choose a glossy screen.
Right.
So these are two main topics that I want to mention. Lack of possibility of doing everything by the keyboard. I can give you examples plenty.
Okay.
And the lack of possibility of buying an anti-glare screen right now.
Okay, so do I find Macs less accessible than other platforms? Not for me personally. I don't develop for a Mac particularly. I've developed some stuff, but most of my development is on a Mac, and I don't use accessibility technology, so I haven't experienced that per se. But yeah, I mean, Apple actually had to get into, they had to go through quite the ringer with their accessibility stuff because they wanted, the way they got popular was they had to get into schools, and schools wouldn't allow them in without having proper accessibility features. So it's surprising to me for you to say that, but if you raise it with Apple, they would definitely take it to heart because they do care about that kind of thing. So there are some decisions I find a bit weird with like VoiceOver on an iPhone, but that's because VoiceOver is a screen reader on iPhone. But I find some of their decisions a bit strange. Like scrolling is really weird. Like having to use 3 fingers is odd to me, and the way it scrolls is odd. But in general, I would think that Apple takes it very seriously. If you say, "Hey, I've got an accessibility issue," they will take it on, and they had to do it. It was actually a marker of their success because getting into schools means that children got used to using a Mac. When they grow up, they buy a Mac. So accessibility became their way into society. Well, one of the ways in.
I don't think I'm that charismatic to push any changes in Apple. I would rather switch a laptop.
They will listen to you. If you record a screen, if you take a screenshot or describe the issue, I promise you they will listen.
So where will they post it?
I don't know. I'm an Apple guy. I don't work at Apple. but yeah, you could email.
Can I have one more?
I would just ask Quintin to turn off the microphone because
Are they not?
take off completely because we've got room microphones which really pick up the sound well. But if you're talking through that and it's amplified,
Sure.
there's a tendency for it to echo cancel. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. If anyone can't hear on the chat, I will turn this mic on again. I can't get it in there. Yeah, secure it. Yeah.
So I have some issues. I have big issues with reading white text on black screen.
Mm-hmm.
So if a website only has a dark layout,
Mm-hmm.
can I say that it's inaccessible and they should make a light light layout, or
Yeah.
because you said if a user can do the job, then it's okay. So I have a plugin. I have multiple plugins that will change the color scheme of the website, so I can do the job.
Yeah.
Usually, unless the website.
That can other users, yeah. I think that is on the creators, the producers of that content should support that. That is the kind of thing you should raise if you're doing development with your company, is say, hey, we should support at least a light mode or a dark mode, or give users the opportunity to choose their own colors. Because, yeah, like I said, colors are the most difficult thing for me. Like the way people interact with them, like, and just the way that people see it. Some people have got, I think it's only women, it's got to do with having extra chromosomes or something, but they can see color more detailed than what we do, and screens just look so bland to them. So there's some like superheroes among us who can actually see like way better than we can. And so color is, I agree, one of the most difficult things. But like bringing that up, raising it as, hey, can we at least support light and dark mode, is a great first step towards showing users you care, right?
Thank you.
Sure.
A lot of questions around accessibility, but also around evolution of design as well, because every couple of years we have different controls, different features, everything different, and new generation acquire new skills very quick, and we just trying to, oh no, we like previous design much better, all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of commercial companies don't pay much attention to accessibility, because it's not about money, it's not about big chunk of user base and all this stuff. And management asking, we already done these hotkeys, what they need more?
Yeah.
And how to promote accessibility, how to in a few words explain them that it's important, it's not about compliance, it's not about regulations, but we need to somehow find a way to promote.
Yeah, and I think engaging with the community is one way. Like having a statement on your software, like saying, this is our commitment to accessibility, having a specific email address that people can email those particular concerns with. And I think like, yeah, just letting people know, users are always going to be mad at change. No matter what you do, no matter what you change, users will be mad at it, and they'll find excuses to be mad at it. But you can reduce that anger and reduce how difficult it is, or by reducing the difficulty, you reduce the anger, because it's, I was used to it like this. But if you make it easy, right? And this is one of the things I find so fascinating is there are a set of stairs and a ramp next to each other near to where I live. Everyone goes for the ramp. No one goes to the stairs. And, you know, if you have an easy way, people are going to go that easy way. Eventually they'll find it and they'll go. And maybe there's some lesson there in kind of a slow change as well, like slowly introducing change rather than just swamping it on people. But yeah, engaging with the community, talking to them about why things were changed. Google does this very well. They have that new sign-in where it's, again, a very simple sign-in form, but it's all about accessibility. It's all about how easy is it to log in, because logging in is the most frustrating thing you always have to do, right? And so just make it as easy as possible. Make the page as plain as possible, because getting through that, that's all people want to do. They don't want it to be fancy. I saw so many designers complaining about how unfancy Google's login page was. And I was like, but that's the whole point, is they don't want you spending time admiring the login page. They want you to get through and get it done. And yeah, so I really appreciated that change, but maybe not a lot of people did.
Many of the big players in the industry file ridiculous numbers of patents, and that would include user interface patents and design patents and things like that. In your experience, do they come into conflict at all with some of the principles of accessibility, or is it fairly flexible?
I haven't seen it, but being accessible is a legal requirement in the UK, the US, and China, I think China as well, and India. It is a legal requirement. So if you're trying to just fulfill a legal requirement, a patent can't stop you. I don't think you're allowed to patent something on the basis that it's accessible. There might be technologies that are patented, but yeah, I haven't seen that a patent got in the way of accessibility.
Generally, the law is on your side.
In my small amount of experience in the field, yeah.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. Artificial intelligence, and do you foresee any reasons to start as soon as possible, considering the cost and time it takes? You know, the measure twice now,
Yeah.
before AI starts taking completely up the curve. Do you see any things that we need to take account of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Priorities that
Absolutely. AI is incredibly new. And one of the things when you're dealing with AI is it's something that's trained on training data, right? And a lot of the training data that's going in, they want to take out outliers. And what are outliers? They're the things that people don't necessarily consider. And that's accessibility. And so a lot of the code that is being trained on is inaccessible code. And so these AI code generators generate more inaccessible code because they don't know how. I think AI isn't going to replace specialists. I think AI replaces generalists in a little bit more sense. And the speciality of getting it right for humans, there's a motto in the accessibility space, like nothing about us without us. Always include disabled people in the conversations around accessibility. Make sure their voices are heard. As with any demographic, any minority, make sure they're thought about. And AI kind of is trained, or the people making AI are taking out that stuff because it is considered an outlier. And so we need to be very careful not to increase discrimination with AI. It can be a powerful tool if it's trained correctly, but it will be a tool. And I think the more we go forward in this sort of artificial intelligence arena, the more the nothing about us without us phrase is going to mean to more people.
brilliant. Thanks. Yeah.
Stop. Peter's over here.
Okay.
Many thanks to Quintin for a really, really illustrated, informative talk, and well presented as well.
Thank you.
Accessible.
I don't know what my ums per second were.